Hello, Charlie, Stewart, they, them pronouns with Ohio Voice, and we're doing the panel for planning actions with Black Abolitionist Collective of Ohio, Black Queer and Intersectional Collective, and New Voices for Reproductive Choice. Thank you, panelists, for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and start with Hana, if that's okay. BACO, as we know, is a new group that started recently. So what are ways a new group can get started in planning actions? Is there a difference in planning actions with the new group that's forming that has experiencers versus a new group that's coming in that has less experienced organizers?
So with BACO, we as a need. So I think that every group, whether new or old, before you decide to start a group, I would assess a need in the community. And so with BACO, we recognized there was a need to learn about abolition, community about abolition. So we came together and formed a group to, with the intention of our community, but also servicing them at the same time. Excuse me. So that's basically how we, Black of July event that we did. And we saw that basically it only educate the community about the history of the 4th of July and how to reframe it for ourselves in our community. And also while teaching them basically the foundations of abolition and what it means and how we can incorporate it in our current world. Because abolition is, to some folks, it's when they hear the word abolition, they don't really know what it is, and they're asking about alternatives. And of course, we have to create alternatives. So our main goal was to not only educate our community, but also give them an event. So when you have an event, you have a space. People are, more interested in that, and just instead of just a teach-in. So and bringing food and creating fellowship with your community is a part of certain needs. People need to know about abolition, but there's also people that probably did not eat that day, and that we were able to provide food for them.
So what should new groups consider, or is there a difference between experienced organizers forming a group and non-experienced organizers forming a group?
I think with especially what I've seen this past summer, I think there is a difference. Just having that experience when I first, I started doing social justice work, I actually just showed up to a protest. I didn't really know the protocols of a protest. I just knew I was angry, and I knew I had to do something. So it's very good to have that, that initial passion, but then you have to think about your motive. So with new groups, I would ask them what is their motive, and to reach out to older groups who have that. Before 2016, I didn't know really about of course I knew what protest was, but I had never really. The first protest I ever was when PJP took over City Hall. And I literally had just showed up, and I really didn't know anyone, but I knew I had to be there. And so I would ask new people your motive and your intention, and to also reach out to groups that align with your ideas, because my ideology back then is not the same as now. So I would find a group that aligns with my ideology. And if that doesn't exist, I would try to find people that align with my ideology so we can form a group and see what the needs of the community are and how we can service them best. And so I find with BACO, our intent and our main goal is to get the word of abolition out, but also servicing our community at the same time.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll make sure I say Baco instead of Baco. You know, the
It's
A,
okay.
the Clevelanders is you know how we be doing it. I'm gonna
It might
try.
be the New Yorker man.
Thank you so much for that
Thank you.
answer. Yeah. Okay, I want to ask Alana something. Alana, so New Voices is a national group, or at least a group from another state that kind of came into a new city, which is Cleveland, hometown, the past few years. As an existing group that's coming into a new city, what are ways organizations like this can build community to plan actions? And how have you found organizations to collaborate with and speak at your actions?
Awesome. So I think the first thing to do when you are coming into a new space is also to make sure that you are hiring people, like first and foremost, that is from that community, so that you can understand the landscape more, and that there are actual people who are invested into your organization and the work that you're doing, and you can make sure how that it is actually going over well with the community, and it's something that they actually want. Secondly, I think you have to be in coalition with people first. I don't think you can come into a community and say like, hey, I'm gonna come in and plan this major action and tell you what your problems are. Like, you really have to build relationships, authentic relationships, and really see what does this community want. Because while an organization, we know because of white supremacy, they're going to be there. They have the mission and the vision and values because they have to adhere to certain guidelines, right? But we also understand that sometimes it's very different than what people on the ground actually want. And so you have to really humble yourself and really go in and build relationships, have conversations, talk to people in the community, go to other organizations, say, hey, I'm new. This is what we focus on. Do you think we could work together? Is this what some of your people are saying? You have to ingrain yourself in that community in which you want to do work in, which means living in that community, patronizing, of course, like we are unapologetically Black, patronizing Black businesses, really going out of your way because there's a trust level that has to be established. I know when New Voices, oh, and I want to say we're reproductive justice, not choice, because Sasha will kill me for that. But we are, I think when we first came, I wasn't here. There was someone else who started the chapter, and they did a really, really great job. When I got hired about 2 years ago, me being from Cleveland, I kind of knew a little bit about the organization, knew a lot about the landscape, of course, since I'm from here. And so the way I found relationships is that I really just went in and asked people, what do you need and how I can support? Like, I initially went in and was like, hey, I work for this organization. We have some resources. These are the things that we focus on. These are the things that you focus on. How can we support the work that you're doing? And how can you like support the work that I'm doing? And so at first it wasn't a lot of, this is what we want to like put on, or this is what we want to establish as our campaign. It was a lot of understanding more of, one, how did the community view reproductive justice? Because there's a difference between reproductive justice and reproductive health or reproductive choice. And what I found is a lot of people didn't know. A lot of people thought that we just did abortion work, which is of course very important, but that's not all we did. A lot of people thought that we only thought and fought for certain types of people. So it was a lot of educating, a lot of learning from other people, a lot of learning that sometimes organizational messages do not translate to people on the ground. And you have to be flexible and make sure that you are using language and terms that people are comfortable with, and also trying to stay true to your mission. But at the same time, I think it's all about the people first. So with me, I came in with a really like humble approach and was just like, how can we work together? How can we build coalition? And that was like my first step before I did any type of campaigns.
Nice. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your work. Definitely just saw a great action by New Voices, I think last weekend. It was beautiful. And yeah, so I definitely wanted to ask how you built community today. So thank you. All right, Prince, let me ask you a question here. So Be Quick's been around for a few years now. Is there a difference in planning actions during the uprisings versus before? And if so, how and why do you believe that there's a difference?
Hi, everyone. I think the first obvious kind of big thing is pandemic. I think when the uprisings first started happening, a lot of people felt like a very real necessity to be out in the streets and to protest for days and weeks in a row. And I think just kind of our relation to the pandemic and what it exposed, I think radicalized a lot of people and shifted the baseline and made it necessary for a lot of people to either be out there in the streets engaged or engaged in other ways, whether through mutual aid. And I also think like the other thing that a lot of people have talked about and that I've been talking about since, I don't know, since like the uprisings have started is just counterinsurgency and how the state is changing their tactics. I mean, in the past few weeks, we've seen protesters in different cities be run over by cars or killed. We've seen police in other cities fist bumping and giving water to like white supremacist militias. And I think like with, even with just like going out to a protest and the assumption that everyone is wearing a mask, like I've been a part of different Black Bloc spaces for years. And I mean, you just mask up, you show up and you have your change of clothes, you're ready in that way. And I think to have that shift, even in the aesthetic of how people show up to a political action or space, I think it's just like, it's changing the way that it feels. And so if you combine like the counterinsurgency and the increased surveillance and I think also the other kind of challenge is that because the baseline is shifting and so many people are getting so inundated with even more images across cities, across the country of police violence, I think that's causing more people to jump in and kind of learn and feel things in a much faster way. But I think jumping in also means that people can move messily, that people overstep their boundaries, they speak for other people, they invite boogaloo boys to their actions. And so I think with all of these things swirling around, I don't know, I think about it in terms of heroism, like culture imbues meaning to action, and feeling like a hero during a political moment and being able to step in and be a leader can be really stimulating, but it can also be dangerous because I think we're fed this idea of what an organizer or an activist or a protester is. And I think it takes time to move through it, to really understand how it becomes a part of so many other parts of your life. But I think like the base things that are different are like increased like state surveillance, counterinsurgency, like the state lending over more of their functions to white supremacists and that leading to more like street violence. And also just like managing how many new people are being radicalized and how do you manage that? How do you educate people? How do you, I don't know, encourage people, but also be like, you need to slow down. So I think it's those things.
Okay, so with the uprisings, I'm gonna go back to Hana for a moment with Bako here. So with the uprisings happening, do you think actions are safer in more people understanding abolition and leaning into defunding the police campaigns? Or do you think it's less safe? Why or why not?
I think that the word abolition and understanding of abolition is definitely becoming more popular. And I think it is safe to mention it. And I think more people are actually interested in learning about and how to defund the police and, you know, how to redistribute the wealth to the community. But I do think that you will always have groups that are going to push for reform. And I've been involved for 4 years now, and I've been an abolitionist. When I first started hearing people talk about abolition and you know, what they think it is, or like, oh, I've been waiting for this. But I think there is a difference between people in the sense that there are some people that will repeat certain phrases but not really understand because that's what the crowd is saying. But then there's also people who actually want to learn about abolition, not just parrot things that they hear. So this year has been really crazy. And with the uprisings happening, it was actually something that I was waiting for specifically Columbus, Ohio, to wake up and, you know, actually like be in the streets and, you know, demand for, you know, push and demand for our basic rights and push and demand for justice for, you know, the people who have been killed by the police, including children. But also at the same time, I think that we have to understand that that's not enough. So it's, you know, cool to about abolition at protest and, you know, to sensationalize it. But I also think that we have to work on abolition in our daily life. And it's not just, you know, from a social justice structure. It's also decolonizing your mind. Abolition is loving your community. I said abolition. Abolition is, you know, caring for your community and really doing that work to decolonize your mind first and foremost, and then learning about how to basically live in through an abolitionist lens, which includes like within the system that we currently have, includes about repealing the 13th Amendment. It includes freeing prisoners, you know, political or non-political prisoners. It includes basic, you know, universal health care, includes people having a living wage. These are all things that are abolition. So am I happy to hear that people want abolition? Yes, but I want people to also deeper understanding about abolition and how you use it in your everyday life. But again, as far as uprisings and protests go, we will always have those reformist groups. We will always have groups that are, you know, high-fiving cops and, you know, joining the Boogaloo Boys and calling them their security. Like I feel like I've seen it all this summer. You know, I didn't ask to see all this, but I'm glad I saw it. Yeah. So yes, keep pushing for abolition. Yes, we should keep educating our community on actually what it is and how use it in our daily life, but also at the same time, realize that not everyone is there yet, and it's going to take some time. So to also continue to do that work, educate, so everyone get on the same page, and we can seek, you know, we can finally receive the liberation that we deserve.
Ashe, thank you very much. Let's bring it back to Prince for a moment. So Be Quick is a group for Black LGBTQIA plus people. What are some things that are considered while action planning for this specific community?
Yeah, I mean, I think one basic thing is making sure that whatever action it is, it's serving Black and LGBTQIA people. So that is about who is leading the action, who is facilitating the space, what is the messaging, like how do we as Black and LGBTQIA people hold space and, I don't know, like literally turn away from the white heteronormative, like capitalist gaze. And then I think on top of that, it's making sure our people are taken care of. So it's looking at accessibility needs. It's looking at whether or not people have rides home or reliable transportation there or back. It's looking at whether or not there's people in the space. I don't know, just like keeping an eye out, making sure there's no like weird people roaming around, like watching you, videotaping, or like maybe going to antagonize. And I mean, I think one thing that we always kind of do a lot at Be Quick Actions is just checking in on people when they're leaving, like making sure, do you have a buddy? Do you have someone to leave with? Because as a community that's at so many intersections and is so brutalized by the police and is so just like erased and just brutalized in almost every corner of life, like I think we really have to take it seriously that not only does the state aim to harm and kill us, it's the state's kind of conditioning of the public and how just like the masses treat like Black, queer, and trans people. And then Yeah, and then I think like the other big thing that like we've seen a lot since the uprisings is just like knowing how and when and in what ways to check your allies or accomplices. There was an action that Be Quick was at that was behind the FOP headquarters, and there's a lot of trouble at that action with like the people that were there to de-arrest or the people that were there to use vehicles to get people away safely. And so at least in that situation, I just saw very clearly how we are in an uprising, we are in a period of time where a lot of people want to step in, but it's also really easy for people to fail you and for people to perform and for people to say, I'm going to be there for you, I got you. And then when the time comes, you're like, where'd they go? Where'd they go? So, and so I think it's all of those things. It's literally like all of the things that are already present, like as far as like police and like the harm that like capitalism does is there, but it's tenfold when you're Black and LGBTQIA plus. And so I think it's an amalgamation of all of those things, but I think it really comes down to safety and really defending our space in a way that is needed, because when we're together and when we build each other up, like we are inherently radical, we inherently abolish binaries, structures, institutions. And so what does it mean to defend that? And what does that look like in spaces where you're so readily erased?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, I'm gonna do one more individual question with Alana, and then I'm gonna do one collective question, and then we'll go into a reflection for a moment, just to make sure people feel like they have some questions asked, and then we'll go back to some collective questions. So Alana, New Voices is a reproductive justice group. How have you been able to connect reproductive justice to the movement for Black lives to have successful actions?
Yeah, so reproductive justice at its core is about Black Lives Matter. Like, you can't really separate the two. We have a responsibility, I think, to respond, to do actions, to strategize, to show up for our folks. The third tenet of reproductive justice is that we have a right to parent in safe, sustainable communities, environments. If Black people are being murdered and brutalized, that is not a safe or sustainable community. And historically, RJ, that term was coined in 1994 by Loretta Ross. Like, it has always been a movement where it was led by Indigenous, trans folks, Black folks. Like, those are the people who have led this work. I think, unfortunately, sometimes because of the white supremacists funding models and all these things around like 501c3, it gets, convoluted. That history isn't something that's explored enough. So people really think like, oh, wait, you guys want abortion rights and make sure that Black people and people who are Black with uteruses have access. And it's like, absolutely, right? But it's also Black maternal health. It is also anti-shackling of Black folks. It is also making sure that parents don't have to worry about their kids being gunned and shot down in the middle of the street, right? Like, so it's all of these intersectional things. It's not just one. And if we're calling ourselves that, we have a responsibility to show up. I know for me personally, this year, we had an opportunity to collaborate with and become a member org of Movement for Black Lives, which is great. They're a national org, resources, that's a good thing. But even on the ground, I think we have a greater responsibility of bringing folks into this work. Cleveland, I joke with people, sometimes I feel like it is little Alabama. So sometimes some of these, no shade, but I don't think we're just as progressive sometimes as like other parts of Ohio where like certain terms, it's well known. Like it's understood. I know the first time a couple of us used the term defund the police, people in Cleveland was like, wait, what are you talking about? Or abolition, like it's just not widely known. And I think that also is a testament to sometimes I think that these national, more progressive orgs, they overlook Ohio, right? They overlook Cleveland and Columbus and different places. So you don't have sometimes some of this same movement language being trickled down. And we always haven't been doing a good job of being intersectional and making sure that we have different people and different groups at the table. And so it was very important to make sure that there was conversations that I'm not the expert on everything, right? And understand that I'm reaching out to other orgs. So whether I'm reaching out to you, trying to make sure the language makes sense, that's in a way that I'm not compromising language around like trans and non-binary folks, and it's still acceptable, but also understanding that in Cleveland, certain language they might not understand, right? So I have to be humble and come and say, look, I understand that they don't know what the hell this means. Excuse my friend. They don't know what this means, but there's an integrity that we have to this movement work, and we have to make sure that everybody feels comfortable. Same with abolition. A lot of people didn't understand that. And so understanding like restorative, transformative justice, using this time, not as just a time for people to be angry and upset, but look, there are solutions to this work. Other places have done it before. A lot of people didn't know that in LA, they were able to organize in such a way that they prevented a whole prison from being built. Like, that's real. So then in Cleveland, when we talking about, oh, we had 9 suicides at county jail and we don't know what to do in corporations. Yo, folks have done this shit before in other places, but unfortunately we've been overlooked, so that information wasn't shared to us. But don't think that we can't do it here if it's done in other places. Does it take some study? Does it take some education? And when I say education, I don't mean formal. Does it take us going back to the basics and me saying like, look, come over my house, let's read some stuff. Or not at the house because COVID, but let's do a Zoom call and Jitsu, whatever the hell is encrypted. We learn this stuff together. We study these other models. And so now people are not just in their feelings about the racial injustice, but we're also saying like, yo, there's solutions to this. We know how to organize. We as a people know how to be in a community. We know how to hold folks accountable. We don't need state-sanctioned organization and some damn police that started from slave patrols to actually help us with conflict in our community. We know how to deal with conflict, right? We need maybe some structure around like, oh, if this pops off, make sure you have that in place. But again, we are experts in our own experience. We can do that. And I think when you are a part of an organization, especially one that is national, especially one that is resources, you have a responsibility to take that privilege and that little security that you have, pour that back into your community. So maybe you are buying books for people. Maybe you are investing in that community in a different way. When COVID happened, I had no problem having a frank conversation with my AD, like, yo, so people talk about food and they talking about products missing off the things. You know, you can't get sanitary napkins, you know, diapers, like real basic shit. Like that stuff was actually being limited on how much you can buy. We know a newborn baby, you're not about to tell somebody they can buy 2 damn Pampers. Really? 2 packs? That's not gonna go far. And if I'm on a bus and only can make it to the store once a day, that's not cool. So it's like, yo, we got a responsibility this is how we're gonna respond. Yeah, we wanna be digital organizers. But before we do that, let's set up a way to get people what they need. And I think that's the thing. When you are part of these national organizations or organization with funding in general, your responsibility is step in and fill those gaps, especially if you are saying that you're rooted in a model that absolutely comes from indigenous, Black people, people who are queer, people who are trans, people who are not binary. Like, this is the work. This is the framework and the model. We can't say we about Black queer feminism and reproductive justice, but you're not ready to put your reputation, your resources, any of that stuff on the line when your people is actually being hurt and brutalized. When my brothers is being out here shot, that affects me in the same way that it affects me with Black maternal health. So I have to understand that we don't live single issue lives. Shout out to Audre Lorde. We got to do more. That's our responsibility. And I think a lot of people, they don't feel comfortable holding organizations, quite frankly, they don't feel comfortable holding them accountable in that way. And I think a lot of that comes to do with a scarcity mindset. A lot of that comes to do with survival. Like, one of my colleagues hit me up and was like, Alana, it's all about security versus compromise. We know that when we take jobs in these institutions, there's a bit of compromise for security. But we also have to understand that we don't have to continuously compromise our integrity and morals when it comes to our people. Use some of that security, because it's not just, yeah, I have security of, I have a job and my rent being paid. Cool, right? Like, that's my security. But at the same time, I can't sleep at night if I know that this organization has resources that can help people in my community. I can share that security. There's no way that I'm in this org just so my rent can be paid. Because honestly, I could have my rent paid in other organizations and be less stressed, right? I wouldn't be on the brink of anxiety attacks all the time. Like, y'all, like, nobody pays this much in nonprofit, like, not for real, not organizer. So me even saying I have this security, I can share that. And I can share and figure out ways and hold the organization accountable. And I think that's what people are afraid to do, whether it's an RJ org, whether it's an environmental climate justice org. Put those resources and that security, that little privilege that you have, share that with the people in your community. And if you don't, you ain't rooted in none of the freaking tenets of racial justice that you say you are. You're lying and you're a fraud. So for me, it's about responsibility and that we have to do this. So, sorry, I'm off my soapbox.
No, I love it all. Thank you so much. Bless. I appreciate that. I got the chills. So I'm going to combine some questions here because I do want to make sure other people have a chance to say something. I'm sorry. 2 questions together. When you start to plan, this is collectively for everybody. So when you start to plan actions, first thing that you start to think of, and what are ways that you are able to be inclusive with your actions?
First, I mean, I've worked in voices like 2 years now. So certain like demographics already pop in my head. Make sure you have these groups of people, make sure like speakers, make sure you have this, right? But outside of that, because honestly, we're all human, we make mistakes and we have blind spots. I think the next step is then, who do I need to bounce these ideas off of to make sure I'm being inclusive? That's one. Also, be open to feedback, be open to criticism, right? So Charlie alluded to the last action. I didn't know everything. So I reached out to Charlie in a panic, like, yo, this is what I came up with. Am I missing something? Okay, good. They were able to tell me like, yo, you good. But then even after, you held me accountable and was like, yo, so the 2 blind spots you missed was, it was out there for a while in the march, have some carpool people bring back an ASL. And I was like, you know what, you're right. So now I know I keep like a list of how can this be inclusive? So yes, I make sure that this checkbox is off, make sure this checkbox. And so now I can add those 2 things. And as I keep learning, as people bring stuff up, because I think inclusivity to me is fluid. Things change, right? So what is considered inclusive today might not be inclusive tomorrow. So PPE gear is something that we need in 2020. We didn't need that last year. Making sure that I have enough to hand out to people is a part of being inclusive. Making sure that I do have accommodations for people who may not be able to stand. Everybody may not be able to walk. Maybe it is good to have like some bikers or like telling, like we have a Jeep group here. Hey, for some of the people who can't necessarily walk, can they ride in the Jeep with you? Can we do these different things? Like the possibilities and stuff is open, but I think we have to make sure that we're not always trying to do everything ourselves, which I have a bad problem with, but making sure that you have accountability partners and people you can call who don't think like you, who have and are a part of different communities, and say, one, am I being inclusive or am I being tokenized? Because I think that is something we don't talk enough about. Like sometimes I think when we say we want to be inclusive, we also are like tokenizing people and populations. We want to make sure like, oh, I got a queer person, and it's like, ooh, that's like cringy. Like it's a way to be inclusive. And I think sometimes we're just like, check off this box. So making sure that you have accountability people who are in different communities and say, so authentically, I think I'm being inclusive. Check me if I'm not. What am I missing? And build off that, and always keep a running list and understand that inclusivity is very fluid, and be humble enough to like, you're not gonna always get it right. So be open to feedback and criticism so that you can move forward in your actions.
Inclusivity and accessibility of course is like very important, and I'm glad that was mentioned. And that's something I've definitely learned from being in Be Quick, like how I can push and learn. And the notion of like what's inclusive or makes it more accessible for people today might not be what works next month. And I think another thing that I really just kind of bring to the table is like with planning, I'm like, do we have an agenda? Do we know what we're covering in this meeting to talk about things? And like, I think just having like a clear kind of set course of action, or at least process, is important. And then I think just like another bare bone things that kind of irks me when people plan political actions is I think people want to be so hyped on like holding a political space, but sometimes I'm just like, should this action be on a Sunday at noon? Because that'll make sense if people are at church. Or should this action geared towards like issues that affect the Black community be in a space where Black people don't hang out? And so I think sometimes it's just like looking at the basic questions that like sometimes your kind of intention doesn't match the impact, and kind of looking at your process and seeing what parts of the process like dilute or mislead or help or speak to like the important parts of that. But yeah.
I think Alana and Prince, I hit most of the points, but I will add, just like from recent experience, like when we did the Black of July event, it was an outside event, so inclusivity, checking the weather, and like providing resources in case it's raining, and maybe we have umbrella if we're going to have that inside action. Or also, which is something that we learned the day of, like that it was going to rain later. It would have been good to have an inside option. So just also like for folks who are disabled, making sure like if you like there's wheelchair access, making sure there's seats for elderly people. It was very hot during the day, so we had tents available, like if you wanted to stand in a tent, trying to make sure that the event is angled where like people can be in the shade if they wanted to, but also see what's happening. And also Prince, I noticed that a lot in Columbus too. You'll find people planning actions on a Sunday, and we're talking about we're talking about just an example. A few years ago, there was an sorry, this is funny now to think about it. It was funny back then too. There was an anti-ICE and it was in front of the U.S. Immigration Building. And the person who organized it didn't even show up. And if you don't know where the U.S. Naturalization Building, I probably messed up the whole title, but that building where you go get naturalized to be a U.S. citizen, it was right across from what is now the park. And so we were just like, what is happening here? And so it's good also to be inclusive. You don't have to all details away for security purpose, but just allowing the crowd to assess their own risk in case it does become a high risk action or is a high risk action. If you're not comfortable doing this, then do this because you're more comfortable with the lower risk action, a part of this action, sorry. But making sure that, the needs are met of the the more marginalized people. And also includes also having a sign language, maybe deaf or hard of hearing, but also like Alana said, meeting with the things would you see at this event so we can make it inclusive for you as well.
Yes, you mentioned assessing risk, how you all assess risk, and with that, what are like white people's roles in the movement for Black lives or at actions, regardless of risk, or if it's a higher risk, is there a difference?
No, seriously, white people's jobs are to protect Black and brown bodies. So if you are a white person and you are saying, hey, I'm about to go to this protest to support this, Black Lives Matter movement or whatever the cause is, then you should know that not only does your privilege protect you, but you're also going out there because your privilege protects you. So it becomes a little frustrating in the middle of actions where I have to continuously repeat, white people to the front, white people to the front. And it's not all white people. You also have to know who your white people are. And I'm saying that and who are those white people that are going to make sure that you're safe, or that you have an extraction, and the Black and brown people that you're with have extraction, and that are on top of their A game. And earlier in the protest, a lot of us got fucked up. And also some of us got arrested. I got arrested as well. And it was the aftermath of like, oh, well, you got arrested, blah, blah, blah. But like, also you should have been a better ally to make sure I didn't get arrested. So now those same white people like always coming up to me, like, do you need security today? So I think that if you are when you go out as an individual, as a Black person to a protest, you need to have that white person that are willing to like not only risk jail for you, but to also be physically hurt, because it's enough. And I repeat this a lot, it's enough of Black and brown bodies not only going out to, you know, protest against the violence against us, but also getting fucked up in the process. So make sure you have your go-to white team, not only on the ground, but also an extraction team. And I feel like in 2020, our protests in Columbus specifically are becoming more organized, because these are not things that we had before. Even when we, like, example, like took over City Hall, or when folks, you know, the one, I believe it was Be Quick Action, where the people like tied themselves to the chain with the van, which was dope. But I think that as we see the protests and the police violence becoming more aggressive towards us, it is very, very high key important to be on your P's and Q's, and to make sure not only while you're out at a protest that you have your white folks, you know, willing to get arrested, willing to get beat the fuck up and possibly shot by a cop or worse, you know, because police have killed people in these protests. Have a team off the ground that is willing to, you know, bail you out, and that are willing that you're good before and after, because even after you leave protest, we're traumatizing ourselves every time we go out, to have an aftercare team as well.
I really appreciate you talking about aftercare. That's really important, y'all. So thank you so much for mentioning that.
I have a question. I would like to hear thoughts on the interplay between maintaining security and therefore secrecy about actions, and getting high numbers of people out to actions, and how to navigate that.
I mean, I guess I'll kind of speak to that, but I think there's a few things in my mind to consider. It's one, is it an action that necessitates large amounts of people being there, or is it one that necessitates like a degree of anonymity, or having parts of the crowd or people showing up being anonymous? And then I think it's like other ways too. I think if an action needs to be more anonymous, but you also need more people there, I think that's about the kind of like sort of, there's like the above ground stuff that you present about an action. But I think if it's has to be more anonymous and you want large amounts of people there, the sort of underground connections and relationships and coalition building and trust has to be there. And I think that involves like inherently like an element or a process of security culture. And so I think like viewing it in that way kind of helps me, because it's like, there's always going to be stuff that's front facing about an action, but getting the large numbers of people out there is more about like who's organizing it and facilitating it, and what genuine community connections and trust that they have. And I think when one or the other falters, the entire thing can kind of collapse. And so it's a number of things that are at play.
Yeah, I think I would agree a lot with what Prince said. It definitely depends on the type of action. And I think it also is important to pay attention to the environment and the climate of where you are. Like, I think right now, people are tired of protests. I just think that, like, personally, I just think people are tired of protests, because, like, we've been protesting, like, all summer. So, like, if someone is going to plan another protest and want a large number, then I think you would have to be a lot more strategic and almost plan it around something very specific. Make sure that you're doing those underground connections, and then probably leading up to it, like the day before, the day of, the parts that you don't mind people knowing, you send out a press release probably to all media, because this is, I think, a time that people are more tired out with like the actual marches and protests. But if you're doing something, I think, more strategic and looking at other nonviolent direct actions to get more people involved, I definitely think it just depends on your planning and your strategy of, and looking at why do you want this to have mass people out? And how are you prepared that if people are arrested or something goes wrong, what is the contingency plan on that? What groups are you inviting to be a part? But being very strategic and specific, and just understanding the different types of actions that you want to get, and understanding what is the reason for a mass outpour. Because sometimes you don't need a mass outpour to make a powerful statement. Sometimes all you need is a very small group of people. But again, it depends on what exactly you are doing and what is your goals around it.
Bless. I'll also add that, like, there's always more numbers than what you can see or what's told to you, right? And so, like, because there's a pandemic too, a lot of other people are like staying inside. So, like, how can you also use people who are indoors if your action, you know, so can you do an email blast or a social media blast or a phone, you know, situation blast of any sort that coincides with your action, so that other people that are home can also feel included.
So I agree with everything that everyone said, and these are very good points. I think that locally, now that the protests have slowed down, you know, people are scared about numbers for safety and security reasons. But also, I think, like, even with numbers, that's not always needed, as Alana said, and it also can turn into an unsafe situation because you don't know other people's motive for that protest. And so when organizing and making an autonomous thing, you know, you don't have to put this event is by such and such group. It could just be a flyer, time, location, and like the point of why we're having this protest, and, you know, circle that within your groups and allow them to circle it. And even people are scared of putting things on social media, but that's really how you get people to come out. So using social media in a way where there's no one person tied to it. It looks like it's multiple people. It's not like you have a name tied to it or org, just making it as autonomous as possible. And also, I mentioned, like, earlier about what folks wear to protest. If you have a dress code, you know, make people wear that so it can look anonymous as possible and it doesn't fall on one person. So just thinking about those things, and maybe circulating a different flyer within your, so people can know, like, this is the risk internally.
I know for the last action that I planned, because we did utilize social media, one of the things that we did was we created like a separate Instagram page. And we made sure that we vetted different things, right? So we had like white folks who reached out and said, we want to volunteer. Okay, so, but we created a vetting process. We looked through their social media. We asked them if there was a Black person that could vouch for them. Then we also noticed that when we did an open call for volunteers on social media on the Instagram, we were able to kind of see what type of people were even interested. So I know, like, right before, somebody with a very inconspicuous type of Instagram page reached out and was like, I want to volunteer, I'm coming. And when I went to their page, I saw a page of dead dogs. So I knew, yo, like, I don't know what you on, I don't know if you're part of this Antifa thing, like, this is freaky. But I was able to, like, really, it helped me to even plan for more security measures for people to be on the lookout. When we did our in-person volunteer meeting, white women showed up. And maybe in a different climate, it would have been fine. But when I asked about social media, it was like, oh, I don't have social media. I said, well, do you have a Black person who could vouch for you? Oh, my kids, but only the 11-year-old, not the 17-year-old. And we just moved here from West Virginia. Oh, you came for a job? No. So during a national pandemic, you just, you know, went to another state. Yeah. Oh, well, you know, just why? Just trying to figure some things out. Again, that was like, yo, I don't know if it's a transplant, but shawty, you can't volunteer. Like, just chalk it up. You can't. Nope. Absolutely not. I don't know what you want, but I don't trust you. So I think sometimes social media can be a good tool to vet and filter people out. And I told the other white people, like, yo, if you see her, she gotta go. She can't be here. Like, nah, because I'm not trying to get people, especially my people, to get arrested because some off person wants to just come and mess some stuff up. Like, we could get you arrested real quick, and I'm all about abolition, but we don't have another way to hold people accountable. So you gotta go. Like, I will call on you real quick. Like, no. So I think being very smart about what you do put out, but sometimes, especially when you want volunteers and stuff, put it out there and see who you get, and then create a safety measure around how people respond. Because some crazy folks, they real bold. They put they little stuff all the way out there, but you know at that point what you need to do and how you need to protect your people.
Bless. Like, within your actions, how do you kind of talk about making sure that we're supporting and giving our wealth to our own people?
So one of the things the one of the ways I was able to do that was with art, right? So my homeboy has an art gallery, does this thing every year, sheet art, where everything for like a month is only Black women artists. All the paintings, everything. So we were able to, like, I was like, yo, I want to do this march, we'll collaborate. But I also knew, like, I would have a budget because I work for New Voices. So I was very intentional, and I went to him and was like, yo, so any of the signs that we do, the banner that we do, I want to hire artists. I want to hire some of the Black women artists that are a part of this. And I was able to put money in their hands. One of the artists is a Black woman who's pregnant at the time, who actually lost her job during the pandemic. So it was like, yo, this helps out a lot. But I was very intentional when I had a budget of being very specific, down to making sure that any of the extra support that we would need, and I understand, like, this is also coming from like that organizational privilege, but being very intentional and telling the people, even if you work for it, hey, I'm being very intentional. I want to have I'm gonna need help with this project. I don't know what you can afford, but I wanna put money in people's hands. Yes, we can have some volunteers the day of, but even just moving the project along. So I was allowed to hire 2 people on a part-time basis, short contract. I think it was like $17 an hour. It wasn't a lot, but it was able to do that. But being very frank about those conversations, also understanding that right now we are in a world of mutual aid funds, right? So in Cleveland, we had Reparations Now, who wanted to do a lot of, they want to help and support Black actions or Black folks. So going to them and saying, hey, we really want to give Black folks and Black women who are homeless or who are engaged in sex work hygiene items, because we noticed that there's a big homeless population and they're not getting the same resources, especially since COVID. They helped us make sure that we were not only able to get donations, but they helped us fundraise. Also understanding that you hold other organizations accountable. So I had no problem. I took off New Voices hat and just went Alana hat and went to new NAACP. Hey, yo, y'all don't march? I know that. But guess what? I need you to cut me a check because I'm doing something for Black people. I get I know how y'all move, right? Cool. Cut me a check. I can put your logo on a flyer. I can put your logo on a little t-shirt. Cut me a check. I had no problem going to some of the even more conservative organizations and saying, this is what we're doing. And I understand you might not be able to contribute in with bodies. That's fine. You're going to contribute some way. And I think you have to like really walk in that and understand like, no, this is all about, we got to put money and resources into people's hands. In Cleveland, we don't have any other really organizations besides this and this other statewide org that I won't mention that can hire organizers, right? But we also always see, like we have our jail coalition and we have great people who do that work, but those people are oftentimes, they volunteer. And I've seen people work for 2 and 3 years on a campaign and they're struggling, trying to keep a whole full-time job. That's something that has happened even with our local BLM. They're not getting resources from nationals. That's just being honest. They work a whole nother full-time job. So when I have the ability to go up to somebody and say, yo, can you donate? I'm not just asking you to donate because I need to pay for this stage and this sound. I'm asking you to donate because I need to put money in people's pockets. And maybe it's not a lot. There was a stipend we was able to get. If anybody saw our Instagram, we made sure we did little interviews. I can't give my homie a lot, but he edited and filmed all those doggone interviews for like over a course of like 2 months. That was a lot. I was able to give him an $850 stipend, right? I had someone help, and I was very transparent with people that, look, I'm not just fundraising just for the sake of fundraising. We have to learn to pay people for their labor, even organizers. I can't sit up here and ask you to always be my thought partner because you're my friend or my homie, and I can't never put none in your pocket. But we have to be able to be very intentional and be very upfront and say, this is my expectation. You want me to do this. You know it's going to take help because you said, oh, get volunteers. I'm not utilizing volunteers for everything, especially not in the climate where we got a national pandemic, people losing their jobs, people, racial justice. No, we're going to pay people because there's money out here. Somebody got the money. If New Voices didn't have it, cool. I'm going to find somebody with this money. There's money out here. But we just have to be very, very bold in saying that. And we pay Black people. And that was the whole thing with the art. That was also a shot in the foot to fucking white supremacy. Because all of those artists, a lot of them wasn't getting into white-owned galleries in Cleveland. So that was another part of the protest. And understanding that we can take care of our own. You know what? Don't let them, fine, you don't want them in your gallery? Guess what? We're going to make sure that they get publicity. We're going to make sure that they got money. We're going to make sure that people know their names. So that was even a pivotal piece. And it tied into, this is a racial justice issue. But we have to be very intentional, even with our grassroots fundraising. I have no problem somebody saying, I need a stipend. Look, I might not be able to give you all the money in the world, but I will find a way to pay you.
Les, thank you.
I guess I'll just say as a writer and from an art perspective, I just think storytelling is so important. And I think when we think about politics or radical politics or revolutionary process, I don't know, we tend to view it as now, but we fail to both educate ourselves and other people on our histories, but also how history is just a series of stories that we tell ourselves and each other. And so I think in any kind of political action or space, I don't know, the ones that have impacted me the most are the ones that just really know how to tell a story, whether it's through emotion, whether it's through an image, whether it's through the feeling of a space. And I think finding ways to connect to that and make that more alive for other people kind of takes you out of the bullshit of everyday capitalism and racism and misogyny and misogynoir and transphobia. And so I think, I don't know, finding ways to use art to show that not only creatively we deserve to expand our imagination, but politically we do. And I think they go hand in hand.
Basically, art tells our story in the current times, in the past times. It's always during revolutions that there are people who, and I always say that everyone has a path when it comes to organizing activism. And a lot of people choose the path of art, but it's very important because it tells the current story, and the past artists told a story of our past and our ancestor struggle that we can still relate to today. But without them, we would not be able to know what was going on 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago. But you had dedicated art revolutionaries, that's what I'll call them, that did the work of, composing songs or even writing poetry or, painting, structures of artwork that represented the times. And I will say just recently when we had our Black of July event, it was very intentional to have all Black artists and to make sure they get paid. And I shout out to Columbus Surge for doing the work to get the donations so we could pay Black artists. And, that was our thing. Send us money so we can pay our Black artists for this event we want to have for our community. Did we make sure that we had a budget to pay them as well? We also made sure during the event that we pushed our cash apps as well so the crowd can continue. Because I know me personally, when I do poetry and when I'm expressing my innermost thoughts about whatever it is, that's work, that's emotional. And we deserve to get paid for all types of labor. So yes, continue to work with Black artists in your community. Continue to invite to share their artwork in protest spaces, because that's also where they belong as well.
Bless. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlie. This is
Yes.
great.
Y'all gotta definitely check out Hana's spoken word if you have not. She's an amazing poet. Hana, do you want to say where you can like find all of your greatness? There's so many.
I love it. Thank you. You can follow me on my personal page. That's harmony.yz, wise. You can follow Black Abolitionist Collective, BACO 614 on Instagram, and you can also follow Columbus Freedom Fund as well on Instagram. And also, I just wanted to make this announcement here while there's people here. On Monday, I will be speaking at City Council when they have their open mic, to let them know that 614 Community Cop Watch is a thing, and that we will be out here, and we don't expect to be protected by, you know, City Council, and it's not asking for permission to Cop Watch, but it's letting them know there are people in the community that will hold the police accountable, continually refuse to do so. So if you're interested in joining Cop Watch, just message me on, you can message me on BACO 614, and we can start the vetting process from there. And also on Monday, it's September 14th, and it will be the 4th year anniversary of the murder of Tyre King. So I wanted to make sure that, you know, I try to do everything with intention. So that's why I wanted to at that Monday City Council meeting. So if y'all, you know, go ahead and check it out. And thank you again, Charlie. And this is really great.
I appreciate it. Prince, do you want to say where we can find all of your great things?
Yeah, you can find any of my writings or like videos on my website, princeshakur.com, or if you want to follow me on Instagram, at sweetblackprince. And so you can check out either of those.
So we have New Voices for RJ is our Instagram. We're also on Twitter, same thing. You can find me at my personal page, sleepingbeauty_Alana. It's a very funny reason for Sleeping Beauty. I have narcolepsy, so that's why, because I fall asleep all the time. And then our Defend Black Women page, because we do want to make sure we are keeping that up. I don't believe in doing big performative actions without a way to hold people after and have accountability. So even for other updates, Defend Black Women _, that's our other IG page. Thank you so much. This has been great and fruitful. So it's been amazing. Thank you guys.
So thank you all so much again for coming. I appreciate you, you know, being here with us a little bit longer. I'm trying to get the timing thing down, y'all. It's just so many great things to say and to learn. I just want to make sure everybody gets the content that they want. About aftercare and healing and all of that. So please look out for Inhale Exhale, which is restorative healing for activists and organizers. Since it's virtual, it can be all around the state right now. And that's usually at the end of the month. So I will definitely get the Facebook event page going for that. And please just support Black people, learn from Black people, listen to Black people, believe Black people, most importantly. And thank you all so much, Hana and Alana and Prince for paneling us today, for joining us. Appreciate it. Ashe, ashe.